Okay. Well, welcome everyone back to week two, where we're gonna talk about some barriers and some ways to kind of overcome those barriers when we are talking about neurodivergent brains and thinking about the workplace. I will just say some of this today it's going to be a lot. It's a little bit more fire hosey today, with a lot of information, but hopefully, it'll be information that you can take away and start implementing straight away. So, hopefully that will help. I will also just say at the start of this, and I know we are people watching it back. My son, part of having a neurodivergent family, means that when your child is dysregulated, school might call you at any point. And I've already had one call today from school to say he's dysregulated. So I might get another one, at which point it will likely be me going, we're going to end now, and I have to go collect him. So hopefully not. Hopefully he can work through the rest of the day. And be okay. But that might be a thing. If that does happen, what I'll do is we'll just end the call and then I'll finish recording kind of whatever is left of the session um, if that happens. So hopefully that won't happen, but that is just in case. So let's start with if you want to in the chat. If you've watched last week, great. If you haven't, don't worry. But what is kind of something that you learned from last week, something you've implemented from last week around kind of working with neurodivergent brains. So if you want to put that in the chat or if you want to just even share, that's totally okay as well. But yeah, I'd love to know something that you've learned in the last week about neurodivergent brains.
Mhm.
Hold on. I'm also, while people do that, I'm gonna share my screen.
Mhm.
Multitask. Um,
I think the I didn't see every the whole recording, but what I remember is that we have to I don't know if I say it correctly, but watch our language.
yeah, yeah, watch our language, yeah.
Mhm.
That's definitely, sorry, just say I have notes at different places. So if you see me looking away, that's why.
Mhm.
But yeah, watch our language, watch the words we use,
Mhm.
and kind of how we're using them, which is, yes, very true. Very true. Okay, so we're going to talk about today kind of reframing and observing and looking at barriers. And before we do that, so observation, identity. Um, I always like to ask, always like to think about the why. That's if you've ever seen the Apple model, they look at the why. The why is the biggest part. And so the why is that core. So why does this matter? Why does looking at observations and looking at barriers matter? And it's so that, we can't support what we don't see. If we're not seeing it, if we're not able to know it's there, then we can't support it. The other thing is looking at how the struggles, are kind of mismatched between people and systems. And again, going back to that, if once we see it, we can then start to supporting it. And then also just that idea that when we observe, when we look around us, we move from judgment to compassion. And I'm not saying by any means that all of you are judgmental, but I know for myself, sometimes we can really judge situations and kind of not really think through uh, who who the situation is about or what's happening around us. So um, that's the why. So just as always, like I said last week, you're going to see this every week. Our attitude coming into this training, coming into those that we want to support who are neurodivergent, is to make sure that we are using curiosity over judgment, making sure that we are understanding over fixing, supporting over labeling, belonging over fitting in, make sure that we are using confidentiality, uh, no diagnosing, and participation is always optional here, but I love it when you do. So feel free to join in. And it's always important to have that when we come into this because one, we're dealing with humans, and two, because we want to create spaces, work environments, whatever, kind of ministry settings where people are first. And so we will always want to remember that. That is our attitude when we come to this. The other thing I always like to add is that we're not here to diagnose, like I said multiple times, but we're here to encourage people. So at the end, today you will have a barrier spotting framework where we can you can spot the barriers and think through how to overcome them. And we're going to talk about an ND accessibility audit, which I love these. These are like one of my favorite little things that I love to do. So we're going to talk about those. And then as well as have a little challenge, like kind of a small change that we can try out this week together. So when we are starting with observation and thinking about kind of observing people, we want to remember that we are not observing them to label them, but we're there to remove the barriers, to remove the things that are in the system, the things that, those kind of work patterns or different things to remove those barriers. And it's something that I find, sometimes for myself when I do observations of different things is that, we're not there to label, but we're there to remove. And thinking about what we're observing, the kind of framework that we're observing, is actually quite easy. So we're looking at what is the demand? So what is happening in this situation? Where is the barrier? Which is what we're going to go into in depth today. And like what support would reduce that friction. And so thinking about the demand is that task. What are we putting on people? What are we putting on this person to do, to feel, to complete? And then, like I said, that barrier, which we'll go into in a second, and then as well as supports. So, oh, there we go. Sorry, I forgot I'd even had that slide. So, yeah. So, what is the demand, the barrier, and the support that can reduce the friction? Now, there are three kind of places where barriers kind of live, so to speak. So a barrier might live in the environment. That's the space. That could be an office space. That could be the library. That could be space. Okay. The other environment is sensory. So that's kind of the noise, brightness, your senses, right? And let me just tell you now, I very aware that we all think we have five senses, but that is not true. We have many more than that, which we will talk about in weeks to come. But the idea of sensory. The other one is tools, which might seem a little weird. It might I didn't know how else to word this, but the tools are kind of the things we use. So it could be a pen is a tool, a computer is a tool, the computer screen is a tool. All of these are kind of tools. So this is what we call the environment. Another place that barriers live is in, let me add him back in. Another place where barriers kind of can live is in the process. So that's the workflows, the deadlines, the admins, the emails, kind of the process of what we're doing. Hold on just a second, sorry. So that's the process. Then there's the culture. Culture is also a barrier. Um, living in another culture, I'm very aware of that. But also within the culture, the unspoken rules, the pace, the meeting norms, the belonging, the extra things, those kind of culture things. And it can be a team culture, it can be a ministry culture, it can be even a whole kind of country culture is what I like to call them. So these are the three areas that uh, is where barriers live. Okay, and it's important to kind of think through this level because an environment barrier is going to have a different effect than a cultural barrier. Um, and kind of even though we're going to talk about all the barriers, how where they live have different effects, if that makes sense. So we're going to get into barriers. And like I said, this part is a little bit of a fire hose. And so please feel free to interrupt, to put in the chat if you have questions, because this is where I love sitting in this space because I get to talk about something hard and then get to tell you the answer-ish to it, which is great. So please feel free to ask questions along the way. Um, so common barriers, just really briefly, is communication, sensory, executive function, transition and change, group dynamics, and policy and admin. So we're going to go down and break each of these even more. So communication. I will also just say I'm going to talk about a barrier and then I'm going to talk about kind of some um, solutions, I like to call them, to the barrier. Now, the solutions can also cover any of these barriers. It's not just like these solutions are only for communication or only for sensory. It's just these are kind of fit together and more likely to be solutions to communication, but they can also be solutions to lots of things. So thinking about communication, there's, those vague asks, the just get it done. Just get it done. Just do it. There's the verbal only instructions, which I talked about last week, how that can be very difficult for people. There's the kind of too much noise. So that could be from emails, that can be, just a lot of ways information is coming in. So it could be you get lots of emails and then you also are in these like different chats. So kind of all this information and communication is being given to you in different ways. There's also the kind of no agenda, no summary, no next steps, no kind of moving forward. It's a no kind of follow up is like what I like to call it. These are just four common communications, and some of these are ones not even just neurodivergent people struggle with, but all brains struggle with. And some really great ways to help with communication is one, if you give anything verbal, you also have a spot where you always write it down. So this can be seen, for example, in a team meeting, you give verbal announcements of things that are happening in your team meeting. You then need to have a spot where it could be a whiteboard where everyone sees in a community area. It could be um, a channel specifically for your team online. It could be wherever. You then go and write what was said, and then you write it down. And it's whoever makes the announcement. It doesn't it, You can decide who that person is. I'm not saying it has to be one person, but that idea of maybe the team leader will say the announcements and then put it in the group chat. Maybe it's having being aware of announcements when you meet as a whole ministry, if you do that, to then also have them in a kind of channel or chat written down. So one thing is, like I said, having a space where it is. It also will help when you have clear communication paths with that too many channels situation. So, for example, which I will just say we don't all do perfectly, but for example, knowing that you have a rhythm of emails. So, for example, in the UK, every month the executive leadership team, the ELT, sends out an email. Um, and that is something that you can expect to be the first Monday of every month. Obviously, they might send out a few more, but the idea is you kind of create this rhythm so people know when people are going to hear from each other. Another one of kind of that too many channels is setting clear guidelines of how long to respond. Now, I think there needs to be a little bit of flexibility in this. We'll talk about this in another barrier in a moment, but that idea of kind of allowing for example, the idea of 24 hours. I will respond back to you in 24 hours. Now, that doesn't mean you have the solution to whatever that email is, but you will acknowledge their email, within 24 hours. and kind of give them that that leading thing, whatever that is. So, for example, saying, I've received your email, I'm working on it and you should hear back to me by Friday or whatever that is. Um, and it's having that will again help with that kind of next steps, setting that good expectation, something that I was doing a coaching call earlier with a mama, and saying it's all about expectations. If we had to boil all of this down to, is how clear expectations are. And if you think you're giving clear expectations, go down, dig deeper, because that's where neurodivergent brains are. They're that kind of dig deeper. So again, thinking about communication, it's making sure as well to, like the no agenda and a summary, sending that out ahead of time, saying, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. I think I mentioned last week that idea of, saying what we're going to talk about and the expectation of, in this, we're going to decide or not decide, or do this or not do this. Again, that kind of just helps that communication and helps prepare people for what's to come. The other big thing about communication and the vague, especially the vague tasks, is also being aware that you might need to chunk down the task. Something that I hadn't realized that I did for myself is when I am given a large task. So, for example, I remember doing this for an email campaign that we did a couple years ago. I was told I needed to do an email campaign, go do it. That was the worst beg you could probably get. And so I just went to my desk and sat down and was like, okay, this is how I can chunk this out. So this is the goal, is to send this campaign out with this many emails. This is all the steps to work back, words to kind of get to that goal. And so that is maybe that vague ask is maybe sitting down with, if you're a team leader or someone else, sitting together and saying, okay, how can we work on this? This is the goal. How can we work the steps backwards? Because that vague ask will then become realistic steps that they can take. So just to keep that in mind. So that is communication. Any thoughts or questions about that before I keep going? Because I want to make sure people are getting it. Yes, very helpful for everyone when there's various communications. Like Michael said, very good. Yes, and a lot of this, a lot of what we're going to talk about is helpful for all brains. It's just neurodivergent brains probably it kind of sets them up well, whereas for neurotypicals, it might help them to even thrive, if that makes sense. So, yes, good for all brains. Okay, I'm gonna keep going into sensory. Um, yes, most people need this type of communication. Yes. So in sensory, like I mentioned, there's more than five. There's there's a lot. We're not going to go into it now because that's a whole, I have actually written a whole guide on sensory, and how to help in the workplace. So we'll talk about that on another day. But sensory barriers are the lights, the noise, the interruptions, the back-to-back meetings, um, having just eat breaks, all of the sensory. It can be the clothes they're wearing or have to wear. It can be the food that they eat as a team. Like, it can be a big exhaustive list. And to kind of help think through this, some of this will need to be a conversation you have with the person. And again, sensory needs, I want to be clear, is like not just a neurodivergent thing. They are more perceptive to sensory things, but we all have sensory needs. We all have what we call sensory input and sensory output, right? Things that help us and things that don't is basically what I'm trying to say. And so thinking about kind of that sensory, um, some of it is having legibility. Back-to-back meetings are when you're literally going from meeting to meeting to meeting. So I know someone who literally goes on a Wednesday, we'll have a meeting at 9 and then a meeting at 10 and then a meeting at 11 and then a meeting at 1 because they have a lunch break and then a meeting at 2. Like every hour they're in a new meeting. And often we'll invite other people into those meetings so then they have back-to-back meetings. So um, hopefully that that makes sense. Um, Great question. So yeah, back to my news, not having that space to decompress. I think that's a big thing for sensory. So some solutions around sensory is some of these will may seem really simple and easy, but can make a massive impact. And I think as well, I want to just say that, like I said, these solutions, all of these things are things we can start doing and start implementing in our areas, in our teams, in our movements. Um, because a lot of these are free. It's just being mindful of them. And so thinking about noise, put headphones on, allowing your staff to put headphones on, allowing staff to wear headphones when they need them. We in our house, my husband has earbuds that he wears pretty much all the time. Noise is a big thing for him. And so he will have them in. Now he doesn't have it noise canceling. He has promised me that. But it just softens the noise a little bit. My son also wears big ear defenders, and he wears them almost as soon as he gets up to when he goes to bed, because again, the world around him is just quite loud. And so I just think why, that's a great thing in the office, if you're in an office or wherever, allowing staff to wear headphones. Now, I will say, um, hold on, I'll get to your question. So I will say with the headphones, something that I think is important to know is obviously there are people when they wear headphones, they can still hear. It just kind of dampens the noise. And then there's times when people wear headphones and they've blocked it out. And so something else that is highly suggested, especially in an office setting, this is kind of more in an office setting, is if people have their headphones on and have a sign that says don't interrupt, or even just there's an office that I've worked with where they just have a red little piece of paper. It's a red little circle dot that people put on their desk as a way to say, I'm focused, I am in the zone, please don't interrupt. And this also helps those who are really hyper focused on something. It allows them to really hyper focus, get in, and not be distracted by all interruptions. So thinking about that kind of system. So now I'm aware that that kind of works more in an office setting. If you're not in an office setting, then maybe think through that a little bit differently, but that is something. One question that's come in is how would you balance instructions across different communication module platforms between neurodivergence and neurotypicals? Um, so how would you balance? So I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think you need to necessarily say anything different for neurodivergent people than neurotypical people, except that maybe you need to go into a little more context, and maybe a little deeper. So instead of saying we're having a meeting at 10 o'clock, so you announce we're going to have a meeting at 10 o'clock, you then put that in the group chat. Let's say you have a group chat. You could say, we're having a meeting at 10 o'clock. We're going to discuss uh, X, Y, and Z. Um, you'll get an email with further agenda things. So that kind of just that extra layer, because a neurodivergent person hears that we're going to have a meeting at 10 o'clock. And if it's a one-to-one meeting, I can 99% guarantee you that they are probably thinking they're about to get fired, because I have thought that many times and I've never been fired. But that is that instant fight or flight mode that they go into, and they instantly go, oh, I've done something horribly wrong and they're about to fire me. And so kind of just that going that extra step, it allows there to be a little bit more. Let me know if that answers your question. Please, like if it doesn't, please let me know and I can talk about that more. Perfect. So, thinking again about sensory things, we've talked about that kind of visuals, like if there's verbal communication, to write it down. And that goes along with kind of other visual things as well. So, I know this has happened in real time. Yesterday, my husband came home and was like, "Oh, we need to do this, this, and this." And I literally looked at him and said, that sounds great, but can you text that to me right now so then I know exactly what you're saying?" Because he was telling me all these instructions that needed to get done for something, and I just like could not see it, could not like I was like, I don't get it. And so it's things like that, that kind of visuals help. It could even be, having visuals, again, this is kind of in an office setting, but having, that visual of how often in the UK at least, and I think in the US, they have the toilet signs, having arrows that point to the toilet that say toilet, those kind of things. One thing that we've worked with a church is to get to the toilets from the main hall. It's kind of confusing, and if you tell a neurodivergent person, "Hey, go down to the door and turn right, and then on the second door turn left," like they're gonna get to down to the door and then they're gonna probably turn right, but then forget after that. So again, having those visuals of like pointing to the toilet or pointing to the lunchroom or things like that can help with that. Um, thinking about um, thinking about lighting, if you can change lighting out, lighting is a big thing for me. I find things to be really bright, so I have in the office that when I've gone into the headquarters here in the UK, there have been times where I have put sunglasses on after a few hours because it was just getting too bright, a mixture of light and brightness. It was like too much. So maybe thinking about the lighting, I'm very aware that they cannot change the light bulbs in the whole office. So that's why I was like, I can put sunglasses on. That's totally fine. Here at home, I have a lot of lamps on and we don't put on kind of the main lights a lot of the time. So thinking about that and getting a little creative. I know there's places where, one person really struggled with light, so they put like a safety, obviously safety is key, but kind of like a black curtain veil thing up just over that one light that was kind of shining down on her. So things like that, just thinking through kind of little things like that. Um, so other, just double checking my notes. Um, yeah, so thinking as well through one other final thing just to say about sensory is making sure that your presentations or meeting notes are really big and clear. So if you are using a presentation, your font should be like 25 plus for anything. I think all of this is 36 plus, so you can see it. And just not having anything moving behind the words. Yeah, kind of that idea of anything moving behind the words just doesn't work. Brains and eyes don't seem to get it. Also behind you, um, if you're on a call like this and behind you, there's lots of chaos going around. For example, I know coffee shops, people meet a lot in coffee shops, like both like physically and online, trying to have a kind of that blurred screen or blurred background. So that way the distraction isn't behind you. So this is probably borderline okay, because I have quite a bright background, but there's no movement happening behind us. So that is sensory. Um, we are gonna keep going into executive function. Are there any questions around sensory? I recognize that kind of there's a lot of things around that. So please feel free to put them in the chat if you have any questions, and I will try and see them. Um,
A question.
yeah.
Matt. You mentioned things like lighting and noise. How
Hmm.
much of that do those things affect everyone? And are important things just to be aware of versus, people that have neurodivergent um, challenges? Does it mean we all have that to some degree? Because even I feel like that those things are sensitive to me also, and I do care and appreciate people that take notice of those things. So I'm just, yeah, curious
Yeah.
kind of about that.
Yeah, so when it comes to sensory, I mean, we all have sensory needs. Like you said, there are certain things because we're human, we all are feeling and sensing things differently. Often for a neurodivergent brain, it's so for example, if the volume, let's say for a neurotypical brain, the volume is it's kind of loud. You're in a place. and it's a bit loud. Uh, and again, this is different people have different things. So noise does not bother me at all. I live in a very loud house and it's totally fine. But it bothers Chris. So everyone's a little different. But the idea for neurodivergent brain, if a room, let's say the volume is at a 5, everyone can hear. Neurotypicals are like, yeah, this is good. I can hear, I can understand. If noise is a sensitivity to you, you'll likely hear it at a 10. So kind of that extreme is more that extreme. Something that my son struggles with is clothes. So he struggles with the textures of certain clothing. And he described it to me one day. I was like, why do you not like these trousers? Like, and it doesn't help that the trousers he doesn't like are the school uniform that he has to wear. So that idea, and he said to him, and it's not the best. The trousers for school uniforms are kind of cheap anyways. They're kind of weird, but for me, where textures are not a big thing, I was like, oh, it's a little itchy, but not like, oh, I can get over it. But for him, he said it felt like cats were scratching his legs, which I was like, okay, yeah, we're not wearing these. I'm not going to force you to wear these. Like, if that's your intense feeling, then that's kind of that. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, we all have sensory needs. Often neurodivergent brains, it's that intense feeling. Does that make sense? Does that help? Um, Feel free just to, yeah, if it didn't, let me know. Okay. So, executive function. And again, executive function, we actually all have levels of executive function where no matter your brain type, we all have executive function, right? That's what helps us make decisions. What for neurodivergent brains, particularly ADHD brains, executive function can be really difficult to activate and to kind of really think through. Um, my brain, this is kind of it's my brain. I'm not saying all ADHD brains are like this, but my brain is can get really stuck in decision making because I want to make the right decision and I don't feel like I have all the facts. There are things in life that I will never have all the facts for. And so sometimes you just have to make the decision. However, a lot of the barriers are that unclear priorities, the hidden steps, the kind of big tasks, like I mentioned before, that kind of um, asking to do this really big thing and not knowing where to start. And also having fast response culture. So thinking about, I know I mentioned before the kind of 24-hour reply. That can be difficult. It can also be hard. It's particularly more hard, particularly harder, not more hard, particularly harder in admin heavy expectations. So roles that are very admin-y can be quite difficult, particularly for ADHD brains. It can be difficult for anyone who struggles with executive dysfunction. And thinking through, okay, how can you kind of release some of that? So when it comes to executive dysfunction, the first thing is to make sure you give people time to process. Make sure you give time for people to reflect. I'm not very good at this, I will admit, because often it means silences. It means just sitting there staring at each other. It can mean quite a few things. But allowing people time to process means that they're able to really start to think through and go kind of deeper. Now, processing time can be in the meeting, it can be before the meeting, or it could even be after the meeting or conversation or kind of whatever. I am very good at having a conversation with someone, coming up with some things in the conversation, and then 2 days later, messaging them and saying, oh, I thought of these 10 other things. Or, hey, I thought a bit deeper and this is actually the step moving forward or whatever that is. And so knowing that and knowing that they might need that extra time. So saying in a meeting, hey, I'm going to give you 24 hours to think about this, or can you come back to me at the end of the day? Or kind of that idea. So allowing them extra time. Giving people some choices. That always really helps in executive dysfunction. which sounds very strange to say. When someone can't make a decision, give them choices. But with the choices, you're giving them usually two options, and you're narrowing what is currently in their brain, which is about 100 options, down to the two. And you're kind of laying it out there. And when you give people options, you also need to make sure that they know it's safe to choose whichever one. So some of these examples you probably won't necessarily have to do in the workplace, but in our house, we give our kids, my son is, he's borderline ARFIDs, which means he has a very low food groups, if that makes sense. And so the best way to describe it is he is a picky eater, but it's deeper than that, and that's a whole nother, ARFIDs is a whole nother thing. But we give him options. We say you could have this or this. And it helps him to be part of it. It helps him to say what he wants to say, but not give him the whole fridge, right? You can't say, oh, pick anything in the fridge. Um, one, because he'd probably pick something that's not healthy, and two, that's too many options. I know for a fact that he would stand in front of that fridge and not know what to pick. So thinking about a work context, if you have something that you want someone to do, or several things you want them to do, ask them, hey, what would you like to do first? Would you like to do this or that? And you don't need to say it in a degrading way or in a, kind of manipulative way. You just say, hey, what would help you? What would you like to do first? It's also, again, like I said, that chunking down, helping someone sit next to them and helping them chunking down a big task. I do this a lot actually with staff all over the world because they're given a big task, they're excited about the task, but they don't know where to start. And so helping them chunk it down gives them those next steps that they need to do. And I'll be honest with you, 9 out of 10 times, I don't even know all the steps in the task. They know the steps, it's just they don't know where to start. And so just sitting with someone and asking, hey, what would you do just before you hit send on this? What would you do to make sure that you could hit send on this? Asking those kind of questions. Because like I said, you don't have to know the steps to do it, but just the questions to kind of ask and help them work backwards. The final thing to say about executive dysfunction is it comes in lots of different ways. And it is predominantly for ADHD brains because their brains are moving so fast that they are just kind of constantly on the go. And I know I can speak from a woman's point of view, that executive function can also be really paralyzing and can be, if you see someone sitting at their desk. I remember I was sitting at my desk, staring at my screen, knowing I needed to do something, but kind of just felt overwhelmed by all the steps to get to that end goal. And someone just came up to me and said, hey, let's go for a walk, because movement and executive function is great. It helps so much to clear things. And so it, I loved that we literally walked around the block. I live in Birmingham. I'm not gonna lie, it's not the prettiest cities. But it helped just to clear the air, but also it shows that movement in the body helps, right? We all know that, right? You're supposed to technically take breaks. I don't know how many people actually do those breaks. But you are, it's proven. I'm gonna totally say his name, but there's a guy that's proven every 25 minutes, if you take a 5-minute movement break, get up from your desk, get up from wherever you're sitting, and move around, it helps your brain to kind of click back into what you were doing. It allows you to really kind of move it. So, and that's for everyone. Again, a movement break isn't just for neurodivergent people, it's for everyone, right? Everyone enjoys a movement break. So we have two more and then we're going to take a break. Speaking of movement breaks. But does anyone have any questions about executive function, or often people will say they have executive dysfunction, meaning they can't make decisions or think through things. So feel free to put in the chat if you do, or feel free to ask as well. But yes. Okay, we're gonna keep going. Like I said, I'm sorry this is so like fire hose, but hopefully you were able to take some notes and think through kind of different things that you could start thinking about and implementing. Okay. So two more things to think about when it comes to barriers is change and transitions. So last minute changes happen. I have literally lived in a world of last minute changes and they just happen. Vague planning, so vague instructions, kind of vague answers to questions, things like that. That kind of shift in expectations, or even, and it doesn't have to be we were going to do this, but now we're going to do this. It could even be a unsaid expectation that's shifted. One person thought this meeting was about this, and the other person thought the meeting was about this. None, that communication wasn't shared. The other thing is just thinking through particularly change, not necessarily last minute changes, but just kind of overall change when things kind of happen and how they are done. So thinking through that, this is more of kind of everyday changes, so not necessarily big changes. Um, when big changes happen, it's really important that more people. So I'll just say when a big change is about to happen. So for example, a leadership role. Let's say a leadership role is about to change. Having people share their voice about that change, and goes to neurodivergent or not, gives them I don't know how to say this without making it sound totally manipulative, but basically, when you give someone an option, when you give someone the space to give their opinion. Hold on, I'm gonna have to take this call. I'm gonna just pause here. Let's take a break. I'm gonna pause here, so just a second. Hello. Okay. Sorry, I don't know what happened. Are we all okay to keep going just for a bit longer? Sorry to pause and unpause. I'm not sure. It was a weird, they didn't actually answer. So, okay, I'm just gonna keep going if that's okay. We are gonna take a break, hopefully in the next 10 minutes, okay? So if that's okay, we're just gonna keep going. Okay, so I was talking about big changes and how when neurodivergent or not, you give people space to give their opinions, they are more likely to buy into that change, into that thing quicker. Now, you don't have to listen to their opinions. I'm going to just be honest with you. But when you give people that space to share their opinions, they will jump on board a lot quicker. And that has been proven. A study was done about 20 years ago, and again, about since the pandemic, about that kind of giving space for opinions, which I think that's important for neurodivergent people who need that time for change, that kind of bigger space, especially when it's like a bigger change. Often when they're sharing their opinions, they're probably more likely going to be asking questions than sharing opinions, and you're just giving them space to feel safe. So the idea of kind of sharing that. Now, you can do this for smaller, quick, last minute changes, but often that doesn't quite work the same. So this is kind of for bigger changes. So thinking about everyday changes or everyday transitions, again, still giving space for people to ask questions. I think one of the biggest things that people who struggle with transition and change is that they don't feel safe. Their nervous system doesn't feel safe. Now, their nervous system and their physical bodies are one and the same, but also different. So they physically might not feel unsafe, but their nervous system does. And that is really important because if their nervous system is on edge, they're not going to work, they're not going to participate, they're going to be in safety mode. And so if there are any ways when change is happening, when transitions are happening, you can make sure that their nervous system feels safe, then they're going to transition and change a lot easier. So things like telling them, hey, it's okay. You're going to be okay. The amount of times I have held my son, which I recognize you may not be able to hold staff or hold your colleagues, but the amount of times I've just held my son and said, "Hey, buddy, it's okay. Hey, buddy, it's okay. So saying that over and over, having them repeat it back to you over and over. Now, I will just say it works for anyone. Again, this isn't just for neurodivergent brains, but it does help their nervous system. Another thing to think about with change and transitions is allowing them to not be perfect, particularly ADHD brains and autistic brains. But I know, speaking from experience, ADHD brains um, really struggle with perfectionism, and giving them space to not be perfect will allow them to feel safe. And you sometimes have to give them permission. You might have to say, "Hey, I I don't care if it's not perfect." Telling them that can really release that. Now saying, "Oh, just give it to me. Oh, I don't care what it looks like. I just want to see it." That's not the same as literally saying, "Hey, I don't care if it's not perfect. I don't care if it's still in rough draft form." Things like that, giving them permission to not be perfect. Um, I'll say this, a real life example. I've written a book that is being published, and I was talking to my publishers, and my first draft, I was late to giving my deadline because I was so scared it wasn't perfect. And I knew it wasn't perfect because that's the whole point of the publishing process, is that they do get it to perfect. But I was like, it's not perfect. I don't want you to see it. And she literally had to say to me, she was she's so sweet. I joke that she's my new best friend. But she literally said to me, "It's okay, it's not perfect. That's the whole point of this." And hearing it's okay, it's not perfect, literally released. I could feel this like release of my nervous system being tense. And I said, "Okay," and I sent it. Still a little scared to send it, and it's fine and we're moving forward. But it was still that hearing those words, "It's okay, it's not perfect," can release a lot of things. So the power of language, like we talked about last week, is again here again with the idea. So the final thing before we go on a break, I'm aware that you have sat here so well, is group dynamics. So thinking about how does the group, how does the team, how do people together kind of work? Now, some of this is cultural, and thinking through, you need to put on your cultural lens as well, when it comes to group dynamics. But thinking like speaking over each other, having kind of a the flexible time, or this is says unstructured brainstorming, but kind of even just if you're thinking about um, you know having a team retreat together, having this flexible time, what does that look like? Decision making over inside conversations, or decision making when the expectation is these group of people will make the decisions, but then two other people have the conversation and decide, kind of outside of that group. So thinking through these kind of group dynamics, again, you kind of do need to put a little bit of a cultural lens on, because I am very aware that there are some cultures where speaking over each other is totally okay and totally acceptable, where other cultures that is not okay or acceptable. And so just thinking about that. But again, in group dynamics, it's that expectation, setting that clear expectation. It's having regular check-ins. So if you're in a group setting, say you're doing a weekend retreat, or you're in an all day kind of meeting or situation, remembering just to have some check-ins, having some space where people can kind of go and have their own space, or be able to kind of just sit and be, things like that. Giving movement breaks is always good, like I said, in group dynamics, because this helps, again, kind of be apart and shift and different things like that. And then the final thing with group dynamics is uh, really thinking about and going a level deeper, in the kind of unspoken dynamics of a group. Now, I will just say we can never get rid of them all. We'll never be able to get rid of all those unspoken rules. But it is really good to kind of think through those, and think through those for a team, think through those, for a movement, thinking through those even as a culture. Again, I'm aware that we can't always change culture, but we can kind of start to think through, how can I help um, alleviate or release some of these unspoken rules, unspoken rhythms, unspoken routines, unspoken whatever, to help the neurodivergent brains to understand exactly what's happening. Because when something is unspoken, often neurodivergent brains won't always pick up on it. Um, or depending, and even, I mean, all brains don't always pick up on it, but neurodivergent brains will really struggle with it because they will say, well, this is the rule. Why do they get this? If this is what is written in policy, why is this happening? And this could be happening because it's a unspoken rule. So thinking about that as well, kind of thinking through those unspoken rules and how can we speak them? It's not saying unspoken rules need to get rid of. Not saying unspoken rules need to become policy either. But just how can we think through those unspoken things and create them to be spoken, to be shared, and to really help kind of create a positive group dynamic. So we have talked about all of the barriers, all the big, big barriers. I'm going to say that if you have questions, please feel free to share or put them in the chat. But we are going to go for a break so that we can all move. Oh, we're definitely going for a break. I don't know why it says we're not going for a break, but we're definitely going for a break. So we're going to go for 12 minutes, so 10 past whatever your hour is. Come back and we will keep going. So if you want to go have a movement break, and we'll see you back in like 12-ish minutes. Okay, we're gonna keep going just because I'm hoping actually to maybe wrap up around 2:30, maybe 2:40, but obviously I know people need to still go. So, and I have to go pick up children today. So, um, we are gonna, yeah, just keep going. Okay. So we talked about the triggers and the barriers and the things that kind of make it hard, along with some solutions. Oh, Oop, sorry. But we're going to just quickly kind of talk about some strength-based observations. And these are things that will kind of lead us into our NDAA, which is our audit that we're going to talk about in a second. And thinking about when we kind of are observing, we talked about how we observe at the start, isn't just noticing what's hard, noticing those barriers and it being observant to those. But it's also noticing the strengths and what people are bringing to the table. A lot of neurodivergent staff and people can bring some really great creativity, really great deep focus. I work with someone on staff who um, he can dive in deep and he can become an expert on that. And I love it because then he can tell me and I don't actually have to go do all the research, but I can know a lot about it. Thinking about energy and momentum, we know a lot of people who do that and who bring in justice and who are big thinking. All of these things are things that both neurotypical and neurodivergent brains can bring. And I think it's important that we remember that. We can remember that everyone brings something to the table. Hold on just a second. So yeah, remembering the idea that we all need to think about when we observe the hard, but also the good. One thing that I am very passionate about is putting them together. I really enjoy the movie Inside Out and how joy and sadness walk hand in hand. As much as joy drags sadness along sometimes and sadness brings joy down, they also walk hand in hand. And I think it's really a beautiful picture for us to remember when we are talking about any person, not just neurodivergent people, but all people, that, strengths and struggles go hand in hand. That, we have strengths and we have struggles. And when we're having the struggle conversations, it's always really good to remember to bring in the strengths. Something that one thing, oh, hold on. So one thing that I have started and we've implemented actually as a school policy. I'm what they class as governors of a school. It's kind of weird. I find it a very different system than what I'm used to, but is for any meeting that you have about a child. So neurodivergent or not, it could be about behavior. It could be about getting support. Any meeting that you have about a child, every adult in that room says one positive thing about that child. And it has started a culture in our school where they start to notice the positive. Because particularly when you are in the neurodivergent world, it's all about the targets that they're not meeting, the things that they're not doing, or the bad behavior that they're having. And it can be really hard as a parent. It can be really hard as someone who has to give that feedback to that staff person, to that colleague, to that teammate. Um, and so remembering a positive, remembering bringing that into the conversation is really important, and it changes the conversation. It doesn't go from just I'm horrible, which is what neurodivergent brains will always think, into wow, I can actually do this well. This is one thing that they've observed about me. This is one thing that they can see. So when we have observation conversations, when we're observing barriers, when we're observing struggles, remember to observe the strengths, and to take note. I have a saying. It's actually behind my computer screen that says kill them with kindness." And I really think that remembering those strengths is an opportunity to share kindness with someone, and you don't have to have a struggle. You don't have to tell them a struggle with it, but just saying to someone, "Hey, I noticed that you were struggling with this task, but like I love how um, you took time to really think through all the steps." That's a great way of kind of sharing that observation. So that's just my 2 cents. It's a little bit of a soapbox, but we're going to keep going. So, observation. Oh, yes. Also, these are some questions that we ask. So, what does the person thrive? What conditions help that make it so that they can thrive more? And what in our systems block them thriving? So, those are the 3 questions. Sorry, I should have said that. Apologies. But those 3 questions are great questions to have when you are observing what helps them thrive, because that's what you want, right? Everyone wants people to thrive. Um, I want staff who work for Agape Crew to thrive. I work with mamas who are raising neurodivergent kids, and I'm going to be honest with you, my tagline is literally helping mamas thrive. That's what I want. And so the idea of if we can think about what we want them to thrive, we can then look at all the different things that help them to thrive and what are in the way to help them thrive. So now we're getting to the fun part. This is my favorite. I do this all the time. I've done these in churches, I've done these in schools, I've done these in offices. So NDAA is what I like to call them because it sounds very like big deal, I'm gonna go do an NDAA. But basically NDAA is just neurodivergent. So ND is short for neurodivergent accessibility audit. That's what that means. Um, so that's all that it means. But what we're gonna do with an audit is I'm gonna talk about it, explain it, and your kind of challenge this week, your homework, your task, whatever you want to call it, is for you to think about, and in one specific area, to do a little bit of an audit. So, what is an audit? The first thing is it is looking at those 5 areas of environment. Um, well, first is looking at the 3 areas of environment. So where does this barrier live? And then it's writing it down. It lives in the environment area. It lives in kind of the process area, or it lives in kind of that culture area. So from there, from the big 3, you're then going to go to the 5, what we've just talked about. The communication, the sensory, the executive dysfunction, the group, and the change and transitions. I will be sending this out in an email just to let you know this document. I didn't want to send it out ahead of time because I didn't want to overwhelm anyone. But I will be sending this out likely tonight, my UK tonight, to people so that you can have a little bit better of a form, and kind of be reminded of these things. And it is really just a form I've created. It's a form that says this sits in this kind of area, this lives in this area, and this is kind of how you break it down. And sometimes when I think of barriers, that different people have, the different things I've observed, it might be actually this one barrier, that this one kind of thing is several little barriers. And that's okay too. It's okay to write what you see. Then you need to just write what you see. That's the whole point of observation, what we've talked about, the kind of barrier and the struggle and the strength. And again, you're not observing the person to label them, you're observing the situation. So often there's going to be a few people involved, and you're just going to kind of just write what's happening. You don't need to write the people, you don't need to write like this person should not do this. Just what's happening, what are you observing? Then, with all the strengths that I've shared, all the solutions I've shared, and let's just be honest, you could think of probably a few more that might be helpful. Is I want you to kind of think through how could this work if for example, let's use the example of I've been noticing that one of the teammates I have is really struggling with remembering instructions when they're told at team meetings. Okay. So I'm like, oh, I'm noticing that. I've noticed that they're really struggling with kind of team meetings and the instructions that are being given. So I would go through and go, okay, it lives in this area. This is the barrier. It's a communication, noticing that staff struggle when verbal communication is given. And then it'll be a big chunk, like I said, for you to write all your observations and things like that. And then it's what could help. That's because that's what we want, right? We want to help. And again, you could write the example I'm giving, hey, asking the team leader or our taking the initiative, not even asking, not putting another thing on the team leader. If you are the team leader, I'm sorry. But saying to the team leader, hey, could I, after you've written the instruction or verbally said the instructions, could I put them in the group chat? Or would it be possible, as you're thinking up the team meeting, to write them and have them ready to be put in the group chat? Or, come up with a solution of that kind of sense. The idea with that is thinking through that kind of barrier and solution. One thing that is important though, before you get to the solution, as much as we love a good solution, is to remember the strength that's in there as well. Again, this is you don't want to make it about the person, but you want to make it about the overall what you're observing. So what are some strengths in putting it in the chat? Okay, what are some positives of putting it in the chat and kind of thinking through that? And how is that going to help everyone? Because everyone's going to benefit from that, right? Like it's not just the neurodivergent brain is probably struggling a little bit more, but everyone in the chat's going to be like, oh yeah, I can go back and reflect on what was said or key dates or whatever. So that is kind of an audit. Now, that's a very condensed down audit. Normally, when I do an audit, I will do one for a whole day and observe everyone on the team, observe like this whole kind of interactions and everything. You can do that if you want. It's great fun when you start to see. I would encourage you to have your barriers list and your solutions list in front of you, which I will send to you in this document. And start to look and see, because you will start to see as you observe barriers that we put in the way. Even neurodivergent people put in the way. Let me be honest. There are things that I've put in the way unintentionally to other neurodivergent brains, and so it's unfortunately not at all one situation. So when you are doing your audit and you're thinking through, if you are thinking through kind of maybe a bigger situation. So maybe you want to look at the whole of the team meeting. That might be a better way. You might want to start little and then kind of grow to a whole team meeting. And you kind of are making your observations, you're writing your different things, you're writing down your list of barriers. And you might see some barriers that are actually helping some people, but not helping others. And that's where this rate kind of comes in, and see that a one is how to do with team meetings online. That's a great question. I'll get to that. So one is that really heavy, like several people are struggling, like either several people are struggling with it, or even maybe just one person's really struggling with this. Maybe it's I remember being in a meeting where I thought I was going into it with making decisions and two other people were in it and they didn't. And I really struggled with that, that unmet expectation without that being clear. So things like that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like one is either quite a few people are struggling with it or one person's like really struggling with it. Three is that, oh, it's a mixed response. Like some people are kind of confused, but maybe that's just not clear instructions, or maybe kind of that mixed response. And then five is totally accessible. You've done it. You're winning. And it's the rate is for the whole of the team meeting. Okay. Now you want to be specific about the barriers and what you see and why you're putting it that. But for the whole of the team meeting, you want to be like, oh yeah, overall it's a three, or no, actually, this team is winning and they have a five, or oh yeah, I'm gonna have to put it more as a one or a two or a four. So that's kind of how the rating works. Again, this will be all kind of chunked out. It's hard to explain. I don't have it sent sent to you. And I did that, like I said, on purpose because I didn't want to overwhelm people because I noticed there are people who are looking ahead, which is fine. But then they're asking me questions about it. So, which I love questions. Please ask me your questions. But someone did look ahead and was like, "Oh, what does this mean?" And I was like, "Hmm, come and you will find out." But you've asked about how to do that online. So, I will just say if you have meetings online, you need to have everyone needs to have their cameras on. Um, it doesn't work if you can't see people, right? You need to have your cameras on first off. Secondly, it's going to take a little bit more because you can't see their hands. You may not see fully their facial expressions. And it might be a little harder. Now, if you know the team really well, if it is maybe your team that you used to meet together, but now meet online, or you're having it just a meeting online, to think through how could you do it? If you know what I'm trying to say is if you know the team really well, you kind of are going to be able to read their facial expressions a little better. But if you don't know the team very well, it's going to take maybe a few meetings to observe and to think through, okay, how we can do this. Um, Depending as well on who the team is, where the team is, the relationship you have with people in the team. If you are noticing someone who's really struggling, again, you can ask to have a meeting with them. Say why you want to meet with them. But and ask like, hey, are you finding this team meetings overall really hard? Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, and asking. Now, you might need permission from your team leader to do that. Again, depends on where you sit and what you're wanting to do. But I really encourage you to even just have kind of one-to-one conversations with people that you might notice um, oh, this person's like always 10 minutes late to our team meeting. I'd love to kind of hear more about that because I'm not saying everyone who's late to everything is has ADHD or neurodivergent, but is often the case because they've um, managing time is very difficult for ADHD brains. Um, so things like that, just making those observations. Again, you're not making judgments, you're not putting labels, but you're like, oh, I've noticed this about so and so. I'd love to have maybe a deeper conversation and hear about their experience. So it might be a little bit more of a one-to-one experience for that. Hope that makes more sense. Okay. So like I said, what I'll do is I'll put it in the Google Drive folder and I'll send an email out once that's all been done and uploaded. But this is a way to really, and if you're thinking, Greer, I don't quite understand this all, just start observing. My first step for you would be just start to observe. Where are you seeing these things? What are you seeing? Are you again, when you're in that meeting, have your barriers and your solution list in front of you. The barriers and the solution list is a bit more exhaustive than what I've talked about today, even because it's been something that it's just like a running document. And so really just think about, just start observing like, oh, I've noticed like all these verbal instructions are happening, or I've noticed, when so and so always, talks about this, people start to check out, or things like that. Just start observing and noticing and seeing, and as you do, you'll see more and more. It's a little bit of a snowball effect. So in the audit, I'll just repeat what I want, or not what I want, but just what will be helpful is to um, observe something. Maybe it's a team meeting. Maybe it's a gathering. Maybe it's actually going and having like a one-to-one conversation. You can observe while you're in a conversation, right? Um, in that, I want you to think through what do you observe and what kind of barriers are you seeing? Again, you can have your list up. You can you'll see barriers once you kind of start seeing barriers. I know that doesn't make any sense, but like I said, it's a snowball effect. And then what strengths are currently existing? What good things are happening in that team meeting? What things are happening? And kind of be rating. You can even rate each. I mean, I rate each thing, and that's how I kind of get my overall score is like, oh, these things are happening. And then think about the solution. Think about, hey, one solution. Now, you might let's do say you do a team meeting and you might have like 20 barriers that you've come up with. Don't tackle all 20. That's not helpful because that's going to be a lot of change for a lot of people. Start with one. What's one thing that we could start changing and doing today? What is one thing that, maybe it's reading through. I've just read through someone's whole policy um for their movement, which I'm not a person who loves policy. I don't write policy for a reason. But I did it through a neurodivergent lens and I highlighted things for them that was like, this makes no sense from a neurodivergent point of view, or this contradicts this. Like, how can we make that wording better? I know what it's trying to say, but how can we make it better? So even going through policy, if you like policy, even going through your policy, go through one policy or even a section of a policy and write through like, how could this be a barrier? How could this, or even knowing one thing that um I don't want to get the UK ministry in trouble. But knowing that, there are some staff who are very particular about their annual leave and taking annual leave and how that's done. And then there's some staff who are a little bit more flexible in how they take their annual leave, when they take it, and kind of the process of that. And for a neurodivergent person witnessing this, it can be really overwhelming because it's like, well, how can they get all of this annual leave, or how can they do it this way, but then these people do it this way. So even looking at that, kind of thinking through like, this is the cultural norm that's happening amongst the ministry, but this is what the policy is saying. How could we put them together, if that makes any sense? Okay. Um, so some signals of barriers as well. If you're again thinking about, kind of different people, is I didn't realize that that was the deadline. So confusion on deadlines, confusion on kind of end goals. I didn't know that that was urgent. So when I have said that to people, I'm not gonna lie. I was like, oh, I didn't realize you wanted that now. Like in my mind, it was just another task. I'm confused about what you want. I can't focus in that room, or I need more time to process. These are all kind of common things that kind of can help you decipher some various barriers. And even if you can't think through, maybe I'm more than happy to jump on a call with you and talk through some of this with you. And we can kind of maybe think of some short scenarios as well, because I know many. And sometimes it's just we need to start having those kind of conversations. So, um, okay, that's the audit. I've explained that. One thing to remember is that when we default to the unspoken expectations, like I've kind of talked about those unspoken rules. Um, Thanks, Michael. It's good to see you. But when we kind of think about, so when we think about the kind of default expectation in your context, um, those unspoken rules, those unspoken cultural things, those unspoken things, right? If we think about those, how are those unintentionally making things harder? Okay, so this could be even maybe this is like I said, maybe this is your observation time. This is maybe your accessibility audit. But how are those kind of being difficult and making them harder? So for example, we've actually now have, I think we have it in policy, I don't know, the whole fast replies thing. For a long time, it was like you had to reply the next day. No matter when that email came in, the next day it had to be replied. And I remember that being really difficult and really hard because it was like that expectation was really difficult. And some people did do it and some people didn't do it, but there was this rule, that unwritten rule. Or, long meetings or last minute changes or vague tasks. Like, what are things that are kind of happening that are not bad things? I'm not saying all these things are bad, but kind of are happening that could maybe kind of change, we could bring into awareness of like, hey, because we're doing this, can be difficult for neurodivergent brains. Or, this fast replies is actually probably means a lot of people who need some time to process are going to struggle. Could we look at that? So kind of thinking through that as well. So I kind of already explained that, but I just wanted to clarify that. Um, and then this week, okay, so we're coming into land. We're almost finished. Um, and we can have some time, a little bit time for questions if there are. But this next week, okay, I want you to, if possible, I know you have a lot of things on, and I'm not gonna necessarily check. This is not homework that I will grade or check, but I want you to think through that audit that I'll be sending you and thinking through it, and I will try and see if I can write up a scenario audit. I have quite a few, but I don't know. Let me think through if I can do that as well. But I'll just send this folder and hopefully it'll be helpful. And of course, always come back with questions. But as you do this audit, think through how can we be making meetings more accessible? Think through how can we make sure that these instructions are clarified? How can we reduce that sensory load? And just start writing them down. That's really what I want you to do is just start writing. How could we fill in the blank? How can we make this area, this situation, this thing more accessible, more, easy to read, um, easy to understand. How can we do that? And just start writing them down. Just take a piece of paper and write them down. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I have paper everywhere. That's how my brain works. But I'll have one that just is a list of different things and just have it there. Just have it when it comes to mind, write it down. You could do it in your phone, if you have a notes app. But the idea of just have it there and start writing it down because it will be, now that we've talked about it, we've talked about some barriers, we've talked about some solutions, you're going to start noticing it can be a lot right now, sitting in this meeting, having just completely fire hosed you, and I've not really given you time to process. But as you kind of start to process, as you start to notice, you will start to see, oh, I think if we just made this little tweak. And the other reality is also asking people there's another woman on staff who has ADHD, and there are things that work for her that don't work for me. And I know talking to lots of teachers, that's what's hard is when one thing works for one child but doesn't work for another child, or one thing that works for one adult does not work for another adult. And to be honest, it kind of makes me dysregulated, some of what she does. Doesn't mean that's bad. It means we're different. And so I know that is hard. That is where you have to really kind of just start thinking about the person. But just to take a minute this week, just to kind of start thinking through how could we become more accessible and write it down. I'd love to know if you are like, if you want to share next week. I would love to have that be shared, or feel free to email me because I know a lot of you will be watching on replay, but just start thinking through and writing that list there. So that is your challenge this week. And that is the rest of that is it for today. I'm gonna just quickly stop sharing. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Feel free, yes. Um, I will just say I will need to go in about 5 minutes, just because I have
Mhm.
to go pick up
Yeah.
children. But yeah, any questions or any thoughts?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, uh, you're welcome. Yeah, like I said, I keep saying it's like fire hose, but because I know it's so much information and I know it takes some time to process, but hopefully it will be, you have space to do that as well, hopefully. So yeah, cool. Is there, yeah, again, if you guys think of anything as well during the week, feel free to email me. I'll send that email out UK tonight. But you'll have my email as well. So yeah. Um, but if there's anything else, feel free to share. But if not, we'll end it here. So cool. All right. Let me just, yeah, cool. I think that's it. Sorry, I was just checking the messages. I realized I hadn't checked all the messages. So, all right. Well, we'll end it here. Thank you so much for coming and for taking part and for being here. And as always, feel free to reach out. I love to go deeper with anyone and answer any questions. And we'll see you next week. So
See
see
you.
you.